And I'll just get started. Since I'm be a little bit of a historian, talk a little bit about what the consortium, what its responsibilities are, and why we're reconstituting it and getting it going. It hasn't really been active for a couple of years since I retired. And so this is an opportunity. You've got some things, some decisions that need to be made going forward with the Agate Beach landfill. That really need the participation of all the members in this particular activity. So this is, we'll open the meeting for the Lincoln County Consortium for Solid Waste Management. It's also known as the Solid Waste Consortium or simply the Consortium. My name is Wayne Belmont. I'm the former county council. And I'm here really, again, to talk a little bit about the history of this particular organization and then pass the reins to Paul Seitz from the Solid Waste District, who will be the staff with Nancy Hale over here, who will be the staffers for this particular organization on a go-forward basis. So I think we should start by maybe doing introductions. So we'll start with Susan on this side. Who do you represent?
Susan Traxel, I represent the city of Siletz.
Katie Jacobson, I represent the county. I'm with the commissioners.
Cynthia Jacoby, I'm here for Spencer Neville, the city of Newport. I'm city councilor.
Jane Welch, representing Lincoln County Treasurer and Tax Collector.
Oh, and Nancy Hale.
Kim Wallenberg from the city of Depot Bay. The short mayor, city of Depot Bay.
Paul Seitz, County Solid Waste District. And let the record note that we have others in the audience who are here to witness this particular meeting. So I'm going to start off with a brief history of the consortium and Agate Beach landfill and kind of why we're here, why the consortium was created, how this all came about, and what its responsibilities have been. This is an organization. It's not often that I can say from somebody who was here as long as I am, this is an organization that actually predates my time here. It was established originally was conceived in the 1970s as Lincoln County. When I say Lincoln County, I'm talking about the cities of the county, the residents of the county. Everybody was dealing with the question of what do we do with garbage? What do we do with our trash? In those days, the regulatory environment was such that basically open dumping in a landfill was the norm of the day. And in fact, the site that we're talking about here, which is the Agate Beach landfill, was an open dump site prior to 1979. As the federal and state regulatory environment tightened in terms of how you actually dealt with garbage, what you could do, there was a lot of movement to consolidate efforts rather than have each of the jurisdictions or the franchisees who were all in garbage do this alone, to come together and try to get solutions that would serve everybody in the entire county. So in 1978 was really kind of the beginning of some of the more stringent federal and state requirements. Of course, everything has an acronym for, but it was RCRA and CERCLA. Regulatory regulations were going into place that had very stringent requirements for what you had to do in order to take waste and to deal with that particular waste. And there were a couple of efforts that didn't come to fruition in the 1970s, looking on some countywide basis to look at some solutions for this particular problem and what to do. And then in 1979, the Lincoln County Board of Commissioners, again, this far predates me, so I'm going on what history I do know. They conducted a study to try and consolidate the place that the waste would be hauled into a single location in the county. And that discussion and study, they actually hired consultants to look around, settled on what is known as the Moolock Beach site or the Agate Beach landfill. The Agate Beach landfill is located on property that is owned by the city of Newport. So the city of Newport was very involved in the initial discussions about what would be done out there. Arrangements were actually made back in the early 1980s between the city of Newport and what was formed, which was the Lincoln County Consortium for Solid Waste Management. That was the entity that was going to look at either franchising the disposal of the waste or providing something that would be more environmentally safe, conform with the then requirements for handling of that particular waste, and do something because there was no longer going to be a number of open landfills in the county. They were looking at that time even starting to close the landfills that existed, consolidate waste in a single location. The consortium actually was formed and entered into a franchise agreement with an operator out of McMinnville. It was a company called Normac Disposal. And they had at that time what was considered a unique and interesting way to deal with garbage. They established what was one of the first, I think, in the nation, bale fill operations. So they took what had been an open garbage site out here in Newport. They collected the garbage, they disposed of the garbage that was brought in by the franchise collectors. They baled it, put it into these bales, and then stacked the bales one on top of each other. The thinking at that time was that by actually compressing the garbage in there, one, you would save much more space, you could get much more garbage into a much smaller area, but two, that it would be environmentally safer by bringing it compacted together. Whether or not that's the case, we're not really sure, but that was an operation that was in effect through basically the 1980, I think 1984, 85 through the early 1990s. And that it operated for 5 or 6 years. And then basically the federal regulations tightened even further. And what happened was you saw across the United States, and especially in Oregon, a requirement that if you were going to continue taking garbage after 1993, you were going to have to meet some incredibly stringent requirements, cost prohibitive requirements to take and actually dispose of garbage. And so that the essence of that was landfills, with a couple of notable exceptions, west of the Cascades, those areas of the state that received huge amounts of rainfall were all going to close, and they needed to close prior to 1993. Otherwise, they were going to be spending incredible. They were already going to spend an incredible amount of money. That's double, triple, quadruple that amount of money if you want to keep things open. So the consortium, seeing the handwriting on the wall, decided that it needed to close the landfill. Normac terminated the franchise agreement. They got out of the baler business. They transferred their assets to the consortium. The consortium then hired engineering consultants to determine how best to close the landfill. And that included consolidating some of the garbage that had previously been on the site into a smaller footprint, because we knew it was going to be a pretty technical requirement in terms of what you had to do to close the landfill. But so they wanted to get the smallest footprint they could. So they consolidated some garbage. They continued taking garbage through about 1993. And then on the cutoff date, and before the new regs went into place, they stopped taking garbage and then converted into where we are right now, which is what's called post-closure and maintenance mode under a permit from the Department of Environmental Quality. And that permit, I actually gave you the latest version of that, and it'll be posted on the website, is permit number 373. And this is a process of exploration by both DEQ and the closed landfills. We were one of many landfills that actually closed in that era. A number of them did. DEQ originally told, and I was actually in the county at the time they did it. I recall that DEQ told us that they would probably issue 3 10-year permits. We would have a 30-year life on the landfill, and then we kind of see where we are at that point in the closure obligations to see what the next steps might be. What would you do with the landfill? Well, that 30 years comes up. We're actually been closed now for 30 years. But at the time that the last permit needed to be renewed, DEQ decided to renew it for another 10-year period. So this permit is actually good through February of 2029. But there's some options that are available for the consortium to consider to actually potentially close out this entire process at this point. And Paul will talk a little bit about that in just a minute here. So the consortium, again, its responsibility was, it was the entity that through arrangements with the city of Newport, the owner of the property, and then with each other in this, that we formed this 190 entity, its responsibility has solely been to operate and then close and then maintain the Agate Beach landfill. That's what we're here to talk about today, is simply the Agate Beach landfill. That's the scope of their responsibilities. Within that, there's some specific requirements that have to be met. We've been doing this for 30 years. The consortium originally met on a monthly basis because there was a lot of stuff going on, especially around closure. The closure did involve, I haven't discussed this, that it was a very technical closure activity that involved not only the consolidation of the waste that was there, we had to do an underlying system to catch the leachate, which is water flowing through the garbage, leaches out different constituents. We had to catch that leachate. Eventually, we had to actually, we were required to take that leachate and submit it to the city of Newport's treatment facility. It actually is treated wastewater that comes out of there. We also had to put on a membrane, a geomembrane top cap on the top of the entire site there, a number of acres out there, and then put another 3 feet of fill material on top of that. That's the top cap on the system there to stop infiltration of water, to reduce the amount of water that goes into the system in the first place. So you have less leachate produced rather than just letting the rain fall straight down on the landfill. We spent actually, the consortium spent several $1 million in order to do this, and that was the cost in those days. This is 1995, 93, 95, to do the closure. And that was a very common expense you saw for a lot of the sites out there meeting the requirements. And then since that time, we've been maintaining the site. We have to maintain surface water runoff. We have to maintain the cap, the top cap there. You don't want to let things grow there that would penetrate that geotextile membrane. So you have to, service that. We want to make sure that surface water is diverted and properly handled, and we've been doing that for 30 years. We've had to change out many elements of the pump station that's there. It's in fact, I think it's pretty much brand new in terms of the guts of what's in there, and it pumps quite a bit of water. You can imagine, even still with the top cap and coming through there's still quite a few heavy volume that goes through and into the city treatment facility. So that's sort of the history, and I want to give you guys an opportunity if you have any questions about that part of the history. We'll talk a little bit more about the specific responsibilities and kind of the next steps that come up, but that's the history of the Aggie Beach landfill.
How much do we pay you for the process?
It is the, when we get to the budget, you'll see it is the single largest
Yeah.
expense that the consortium has for that, for the maintenance and monitoring of that is disposal of the leachate. And they've done a number of studies in Newport in terms of the constituents that were originally going in there, which have lessened over the period of years. You can imagine, you leach it out for so many years, it's not going to be stuff continually going through there. But they have studied both the quality and the quantity and charges accordingly. That's an amount that's set by the city in their internal processing.
Do they provide reports of what the leachate is looking over the years?
Paul will get into that point. He'll talk about one of the requirements under the DEQ permit is we have to do monitoring plans and testing. We've been doing testing sometimes twice a year for 30 years, basically. So we have numerous test results of what's coming off, and those were approved. Engineering geologists set the monitoring wells. Those were approved by DEQ, and we continue to do testing. We'll probably have to do that for a little while.
Wayne, I have kind of a legal question. So who's the owner versus who's responsible? Is the county the owner, but the consortium is responsible?
No,
party?
and maybe I didn't clarify that. The property itself is owned by the city of Newport.
I see.
So that entire acreage up there, and actually Thompson's has their transfer station, if you're aware of that, out at Aggie Beach. They lease that particular property from the city too. That's actually owned by the city.
So it's city property, Thompson is part of it, and the consortium.
The consortium had basically had the lease.
Ongoing monitoring.
Yeah, the consortium is not the owner of the property, but we are the operator of the property where the landfill is.
And we have to operate that according to DEQ.
Which includes these closure and post-closure monitoring maintenance requirements.
I'm with you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Any other questions on that?
Where'd the garbage go after it was closed?
Well, the franchise haulers, most of them went to Coffin Butte and currently are going to Coffin Butte. I think there'll be a discussion probably with, within the solid waste district and or within each of your individual entities at some point here, because at least what I'm hearing, I'm not in the loop anymore directly, but I think Coffin Butte is sort of on its last legs in terms of how much longer it can accept garbage. And so there'll be, determinations where that goes. frankly, again, starting back in 1993, they were really pressing really hard to keep any landfill open west of the Cascades, because that's where the rain falls. And it's been getting harder and harder to do that and to meet the environmental requirements for that. So it could be that someday you're looking at sites that are east of the Cascades, hauling it all the way there. But that's not a discussion for this group or this meeting.
Or we're gonna go to June Hall.
I don't know. No idea. All right, so that's sort of the history. Any more questions on the history? Now, let's talk a little bit about the future, the future operational, consortium operational structure, and that's introducing Paul and Nancy. And maybe you guys could just talk a little bit about yourselves and what you do in the county system.
So, Paul, I fortunately work with most of you in the solid waste district. The district touches all of the cities as well. So it's wonderful to have a good partnership in that realm. And so I think it was an easy handoff from Wayne to say the operational functions of the landfill could land in the lap of the district, and we could work on DEQ post-closure stuff, work with the engineer, we can talk trash, we understand what's going on there. And then for aspects of record keeping, Nancy has been, past the here real quick and say, you will be our keeper of excellent records and maintenance of.
What was that?
That's just it looks like Keeleen is listening in.
Nobody knew. I think that was my email going on. I think that was your email going on.
Oh, okay.
So yes, I'm the paper pusher, so I'll just take the paper and send it on to everybody, and if there's ever any questions, I can get them answered very fast.
So hopefully Nancy will be the one maintaining the list of the representatives from each of the entities and making sure that you guys get the information, agendas, the information that goes back and forth that we get from DEQ and others. And she will help with that. So make sure you keep her posted on who the current representatives are, and addresses and phone numbers and that information.
And you mentioned going forward, I think what's important here is we went through a lull period. There's a lot of maintenance of 30 years, but that ended in order for us to exit DEQ's permit. And that is actually a goal, because then the city gets to have a city park or whatever it chooses on that ground in the long distance future, whatever that becomes. You have to get out from the DEQ regulations as being a landfill and post closure to get there. So that's what we're kind of gearing back up, and this group, what we need is we'll need attendance and more frequent attendance in the coming probably 2 to 3 years to get through the final post-closure aspects of the landfill, so that we can get through the regulations, check off the boxes with the engineer, do the right reports, and be satisfied that we're not contaminating or anything else as a result. So that then it becomes a whole nother conversation, and that's this group's also to have as part of it. So there's going to be a number of new conversations coming, which we have not been having for the last probably 15 years.
So maybe that's one of the things we wanted to do kind of up front, was talk about meeting dates and locations. This is the new system the county has, where they're doing a hybrid meeting with Zoom and then in person. And I think it's the preferred method the county has, at least, for holding the meetings. I think the county's fine with hosting them, doing that here. And so if that's going to be acceptable to the representatives, that's great. We used to meet, as I said earlier, years ago, when we had a lot of activities going on. We'd meet on a monthly basis. But it really got to the end where we're meeting quarterly. And I'm thinking that probably initially you might want to meet monthly, or at least in the course of the next 6 months, meet a few times, because I think there's some stuff that's going on that Paul will talk about, that you want to have some discussions about, give some direction to staff and to the consultants as to where you want to go. And then after that, I think moving into a quarterly meeting will probably work, but at least there's going to be the option of attending by Zoom. And so if you can't make it in person, you can do it that way. So we wanted to just lay out, I mean, today is a Thursday. We used to meet on Mondays in the afternoons. Is there any kind of preference, people, with your calendars as to when you would like to meet?
Thursdays are better for City of Newport.
Okay.
We have our city council meetings Mondays.
Wednesday mornings are bad.
I know, we know it's not kind of the general ones. I want to make sure I'm not running up against any council meetings or anything of that nature.
Yeah, what about fall?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thursdays are awesome. So if we're every 6th week, or would you prefer monthly? I would prefer monthly, but if folks go, yeah, right, we can make it every 6th. We can expand it out just a little bit more. I think we can get all our decisions kind of in, but there will be a number of things. Expenditures are going to be coming to the consortium, which have not been coming if we're going to do post-closure. And so that's where we're gonna want to start having discussions. What do we want to do about it? And so that's going to be, so my preference would be if Nancy could send out an invitation once a month and everyone say, yeah, that's great. But if you go, no, let's move it a little wider space, we can do every 6 weeks. Is there an option there that folks?
I don't mind monthly, once you get it done.
All right,
Get it done.
well, then,
So I think
Thursday.
Paul, you and Nancy can send out a calendar then for at least the next 3 or 4 months where the hearings be held and what to do, and make sure it gets on the calendar for the county too.
we'll cover the details from what we hit high marks today, implied budget. We got to get that in front of us. But we'll cover the details of all the things we're going to go into in the very next meeting and start, and you'll kind of get a feel for what we're going to head down the rabbit holes.
The other thing that we really need to accomplish today too is that we had in the past, we had a standing order that allowed, so that we weren't meeting monthly, meeting quarterly, but we get bills monthly. So there are ongoing bills. There is a electricity bill that has to be paid. You get the charges from the city of Newport for sewer. There is, I think, a telephone line that has a monitoring system on the well. If something goes south on that, then there's some phone calls that are made, so we have to pay a phone bill.
And then here,
And then the consultants who are doing the work, they're doing the monitoring plan, they're doing the testing, they're doing that stuff. We have those. And what we did was authorize a standing order to authorize the chair of the consortium. We'll talk about that in a minute too, to sign that particular order. But Nancy would send out the order with the billing information to everybody. So if anybody has any questions about any of the bills, any of the stuff that's being paid for, you can raise those. And if we need to pull an item and wait until there's a face-to-face meeting or a regular meeting, we can do that. But otherwise, we would get those particular bills taken care of and have the chair sign an order.
We looking at a huge increase in expenses coming out our way? Is our budget set right now?
Yeah.
I don't think.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about that when we get the budget, in terms of how you're paying for this, what you're doing, how you do this. Part of something that was developed by Q as part of their requirements in closure has the funding covering this, and I'll talk about that.
Oh, okay.
So this is more the mechanics of getting those bills paid. And I'll jump ahead a little bit here. When you get ready to elect officers, what we have traditionally done is had the board's representative or commissioner's representative be the chair, only for the convenience of getting that order processed and signed and moving forward. The chair really has no other responsibilities other than running the meetings, doing that and making sure the meetings are there. So that's just something to keep in mind as you elect officers for the organization. So when we get to the decision package, and then we'll ask you to do another motion to authorize standing order to pay, we'll develop that order and sign. Do that. So let's talk a little bit about now what the consortium's specific responsibilities and roles are. And first thing is that, and Nancy, can you bring up the DEQ permit? Everything is tied to the DEQ permit. That is, there we go.
Oh. Is it that way? Where is it?
Is it?
You can, I don't see, you can click on that,
I guess just-
documents and it'll go to where you're.
Here, double click.
There's an issue. Over on the right. All the way.
Sure,
there.
there you go.
And then you
Now
can go
that's
into
that
the folder.
shows things that are on the
Go to your big screen.
permit below.
Is that what you want? Right
Yeah.
there. Okay, come on.
Got it.
Thank you. There you go. Now you can toggle back and forth as we get into this.
Okay.
So this is the formal permit we have from DEQ. It's permit number 373. This version was granted in 2019. It runs to February 28th, 2029. And it establishes the responsibilities we have for in the post-closure mode. It includes, and I'm just gonna briefly describe these, and then Paul can go into more detail when it talks about steps, but it requires that we do a monitoring plan. We have an environmental monitoring plan, which is amended and updated every once in a while. We have to submit an annual report with the testing, the results of the testing that we do on an annual basis. Some years DEQ requires what's called a split sample. So the constituents that are selected from are collected from the monitoring wells are sent off by the geotextile firm to our testing site. The DEQ takes half the sample and sends it to their own independent testing site. They do that. They have the ability to do that particular activity. We have to maintain the site itself. We have to, of course, maintain all the working aspects of that in order. And that especially means that we have an annual, or no, I'm sorry, a monthly company that comes out there, Pump Pro, that looks at the pumps, makes sure they're operating correctly, does any service that's required on that. We have to watch those very carefully. That's the mechanical part that's probably the most prone to possibly having some issues, but we watch that very, very carefully and deal with that. We also have contract out with somebody to maintain the top cap, the vegetation on the top cap. And then occasionally we'll have somebody go out and do work on the surface water coming off of there in those particular activities. One of the other requirements is that, and this is, I'll talk to now your question of how do we pay for all this, is that we have to submit, and we have submitted a financial assurance plan and certification. And I've done that on behalf of the consortium. And the way we set it up, we're a little bit unique on what we do here. In fact, DEQ really liked the way we did it, and it's actually used us as a model and for other jurisdictions. Since we have 6 different members who have differing financial obligations for this site, based on, again, we calculated the amount of waste that each of the jurisdictions brought in, the county for unincorporated, each of the cities within the cities. There's a percentage of the responsibility that's allocated to each of the entities there. We then had a geological engineer go in and estimate. They have to provide an estimate of 30 years worth of monitoring and maintenance costs. And they give us an estimate, a financial estimate, and it's discounted to current value, all the process set by Oregon administrative rules in terms of how they calculate that. They bring that back, and then we have to provide some assurance that we can pay for that. And what we have done is we have each of the entities has set up either a separate fund within their budgets, their own budgets, or a trust account, some kind of account, and has been collecting money from waste. As we've done the waste, put it aside, and it can only be used for these closure and post-closure activities. That money there until we're completely done with this particular process. That's all it can be used for. So it's held in reserve for those particular purposes. What we do for financial assurance then is we compare the amount that's been collected by the entities to the amount of the estimated cost of that thing, and that has to exceed that, the amount we have in reserves, and it does currently exceed, not much, but it exceeds the amount that they're estimating is the cost over that period of time. And then we submit. What we do is we collect all the audited financials for each of the entities and attach those to a letter that goes to DEQ saying, here's our estimate from the geotechnical consultant. Here's the amount we've got in reserve. Here's how it meets our obligations. So we have to do that. And I'm currently preparing that, since I've been the one to sort of put those together. And we'll have that submitted probably before the 1st of October for that time, and then be passing the torch over to Paul to do those in future years to make sure, and I'll give them the process we go through from doing it. So there is money. You already have money in reserve. Each of the entities already has money in reserve, fulfilling its obligations at the latest estimate of what the cost would be. So it's not money that comes out of your general funds. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe ask us, do we know what we have?
You should. If you don't, I do.
Thank you. I will be reaching out to you just to make sure what I show is what is really there.
And then what we do have, the other responsibility we have is to maintain, not just to maintain the site, but one of the assets that was transferred to the consortium at the closure of the bale fill operation was this huge building. It's the Baleful building. And I don't know how many of you have ever been to Agate Beach.
No, where is it?
And that's probably something Paul could set up and do a little tour. It's in northern Newport. Is to do a tour out there and see the site. It's immediately north of the transfer station that Thompson's operates out there for current goods that comes through. That Baylor building is, as you can imagine now, so 40 years old
Yeah.
and very decrepit. Paul's going to talk a little bit about what we're hearing from both the city of Newport, who did an inspection of the particular building, and then from our insurance company in terms of where we're going here, what we might be doing with that. So I think that I can turn this over now to Paul, and we can start with the discussion items. That's the history, unless there's any other questions on the history.
So,
May I ask a question?
No, you can have public comment again.
so I think what's really important about landfills to understand is water. And so that DEQ really, they don't care about what's in it or about it. They care about the water that comes out from underneath it, the water that's entering it. And so a lot of our activity is based upon that. And so I want to quickly mention the well testing. We're doing really well with the well testing. Fortunate or unfortunate, the background noise. So if you go above the landfill where there is no leachate or anything else possible, and you test the ground, it has metals and other things. It's called Iron Mountain back there. And these things in the water make a background noise. I'm just going to call it background noise. And they compare the landfill to that. Now, they have drinking water standards, which they're using to look at leachate. They go, okay, well, you're above or below this level of amount of bad things in your water. So what they're doing with the landfill testing is seeing what we look like compared to the background. The reason I go into such detail with that is as that water is flowing underneath the landfill, we're not seeing a change, a significant change from the background noise from the leachate to the other side, which is great news for us, meaning they may not have a lot of icky stuff at all in the water coming on this side, which is going to help us get to post-closure. So that's what this testing is all about, is to say, can we? Now the pumping, there is groundwater. What happens when you run these pumps is the groundwater makes a dip underneath the landfill, and they're actually drawing down the water below the landfill a little bit when they're doing that. And what we're going to be testing further is if you turn off the pumps and water comes back to its normal level, does that change the background noise? That's when we talk about testing. So that's in our future, what we'll be chatting a little bit about is in order to close, we have to demonstrate, one, we can maybe turn off the pumps in the future and Newport doesn't have to pay for this until 20 billion years into the future. We can not have to pump water ever again. Is that a possibility? So that's a thing that we're looking at. We're looking at the noise that's coming from the landfill. And every time you change the pumps or water happens, is there any difference? And again, we're having a good streak of no, there is no difference. And this is for years. And that's what we're testing for. So I just thought I'd cover a little bit about that as an important step as to what our responsibility is and things that we're going to be doing. And currently, over this summer, we turned off the pump for a day to see what would happen. And the water level didn't like shoot out anything, or there was not a worrisome event at all. And then we went back to DEQ and said, okay, we did this. Can we go now? And so they've given us permission for a 6-week test to turn off the pumps longer. And it comes back, this would be a budgeting question and ultimately some decisions that we can make in the long-term future for how we want to spend our money. Do we want to spend all our money pumping water, or do we want to spend money on other post-closure activities? And if we can start turning off those pumps, even if it's only for a few months a year, that's a significant savings because you're not having to pay savings. So there's electricity and everything else that goes with it. So that everything about that part of it is water. And so that just a mention of that. The top cap maintenance, we have been maintaining it around the wells were really well, and we mowed it this last summer, which cost us a little bit of a fortune because things were a little thicker. But we're going to stay on top of that more And as a result of looking at the whole cap this last summer, we found a little itty bitty area where there's been a little erosion in the top cap, and so we're gonna have to go back and put some soil on that. So we have some maintenance things that we have to do there, and that's stuff we'll be discussing. That's what our engineer will be presenting. You'll see bills and other things related to that in the near future. And then we're to the blue building. So out there, that blue building, we went to the city and said there was an opportunity or a thought, can we save this building? Can we not save it? And we asked the building inspector to go look, and he kind of came back and said, well, if you want to get a steel engineer to tell us it's wonderful, great, but otherwise the building should come down. It's not in a safe position. And they actually issued a notice and order to us telling us to bring the building down or prove that it could be saved. So I think the basic decision for this group will be, is that the course we wish to choose? I did a preliminary bid, and then what they were wild all over the board numbers. And so we're gonna have to go back and probably do a formal bid on this, which Wayne, it does news to Wayne. I just found out this morning. And so we're gonna have to probably come back and look at that in a more formal bid process and go back to the city of Newport and make a Mother May I request to say, can we have an extension on this bid process so we can do this correctly? And that will include demo of the building to a safe position, and then removal of the materials to a place that is proper and recycled, of course. So that's all going to be in our near future.
And I think just to know for the record that Thompson's has been using that particular building, has some materials that are in there now. We'll have to coordinate in terms of timing for anything that's done there with their needs, what they're doing and what they have to go out there. So that's just to note that that's another part of the whole equation.
Do we have a minimum and a maximum? So we know a range?
Of the demolition.
Mhm.
One bid came for 45 and they did not qualify. And
Okay.
one bid came for 159.
159.
And that seemed very high, and we need additional information, and we need to put this bid pack together. So that's where I saw a big range and a lot of discrepancies that we're gonna do with building.
Sure.
Is that for destruction?
Just destruction, it's just the range of the building. And so what,
What's the square foot on the building?
I don't know the square footage off the top of my head, large enough. It's a huge pole barn, maybe, yes, so. You can put garbage trucks.
Yeah.
So, related to that and what Wayne was just saying, Thompson's has been very helpful with working with us on this. We have made an agreement that we're going to post the site as unsafe on the 15th, which is the date that the city gave us to comply with. And we will post and not occupy the building any further. So any activities related to the building thereafter will be demolition activity. So we're going to come into some sort of compliance with the city's requests. And then we're going to have to issue something to our insurance company stating what our goals are, and we are currently seeking bids. But the first round did not go as quite as planned. So, to close out the permit. So in order to close out the permit with DEQ, this is going to involve a little bit additional engineering work, some additional testing work, and it'll probably be about 3 years. So we're going to have to prove to DEQ basically the water is okay, and we're going to have to make a determination whether the water is okay if we turn off the pump for only summer, for all year. And so the engineers are going to be very carefully stepping each of those steps through. And then we're going to have to come up with a plan as to what we're going to do with this thing in 2 or 3 years. Whether it is a golf range, what was it, golf and ski range that Wayne wants to spend his retirement days at. Whatever it is we wish to. Pickleball courts.
People are wanting.
And so whatever it is we choose to make this into as actually, I should say, ultimately the city of Newport chooses to do with this, but the consortium is going to have to give guidance. And so we're going to have to lead from point A to year 2099. What is it that we're heading towards? and put that into this so that DEQ understands what our intentions are with our, and I don't have a good word for post closure, but leaving the permit process with DEQ, so that's. Will we take ownership?
Can I ask a question about that? So. Again, this is kind of a legal question. So the consortium, you said, provides guidance. So do we provide a recommendation to the city? So the city ultimately decides their property. So are we making a recommendation? Are we just
think
providing
probably-
ideas? How
I
does
think the
that?
way it probably works, and again, DEQ, I have to, DEQ closed a bunch of landfills 30 years ago, 1993. They're currently trying to figure out what to do with all kinds of landfills. They don't know.
Yes.
But if I was to hazard a guess of where it's gonna go, they're gonna put certain conditions on this. They're gonna make us put deed restrictions, the city. Through the consortium, we're gonna have to put some deed restrictions. It says, for instance, you can't put a school out there.
Yeah.
You can't put housing out there. You can't put, I mean, we know that geologically, this is not the most stable area.
So DEQ still approves that plan. So
DEQ has to do that. And I've heard,
Okay.
at least in some of the other ones, there probably will place some pretty strict deed restrictions that will probably
Yeah.
provide as much, at least what you can't do.
Second question, do you have to actually come up with a usable plan, or can you just say, we're just gonna kind of like.
Open
trees
space.
And let it go? I mean,
Leaving it as open space is probably.
does it have to be?
Best
developed?
option.
That's my question.
Does it have to be?
Developed?
No. Ultimately, that will be a city's, the Newport decision with that property, but whatever it's gonna, whatever goes out there will have to be compatible with a closed landfill.
Okay.
And I think the consortium has to give the report to DEQ, so that's why we're involved. in
I
it.
see. Okay.
So we have a partnership here, but ultimately they get whatever we.
Follow.
So anyways, that's the post-permit planning of what we want to think. So that's, I'm kind of just skipping along the top. We don't have to make any of those decisions today, but those are things that are coming in our near future while we want to. I think that's just so you hear the topics here, where that's what will be discussed.
So now we can move to some action items, specific ones that we're hoping to do today, so we can set this thing up for future operations. And the first is election of a chair and a vice chair. And again, sorry, Katie, I would strongly recommend that you elect the commissioner's representative as the chair. That way, it just helps with the paperwork we have to do, especially the orders getting signed, bills getting paid.
Can I make that motion?
Sure.
I'll move that, we appoint Katie Jacobson on chair. of the consortium.
I'll second it.
All in favor, aye?
There you go.
Okay.
Record will note that that's been moved and seconded. Now you can take.
And then it would be whoever is the VOC chair in January.
Well, it's up to you.
Okay.
What historically, what the board has done is they rotated or had one person who had an interest in doing this continuous, whoever you designate. Don Lindley was here for years doing this. Yeah.
Good.
So now we needed the vice chair, Madam Chair. Just in your absence, who can run the meeting?
Did you accept the vice chair position?
Well, I'm here as Spencer's
Oh, well, that's
alternate,
good.
actually, but
Yeah.
you know, I'm interested in coming, but I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure I'm the right person.
How about you, Kathy? Well, also as vice chair. All right, I'll nominate Kathy as vice chair.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
I,
All right, I guess, yeah, you can vote for yourself.
Sure.
We'll do it, okay?
Second action item was a motion to authorize standing orders, and this would authorize, the process is such, and we'll actually prepare a order based on this, but on the motion is to authorize the chair to sign the monthly bills, paying the monthly bills after the bills are sent to the representatives for the consortium. There's an opportunity for the representatives to comment on anything there. No comments are received in the allotted period of time, and the chair is authorized to execute the standing order to pay the bills. So that would be the form of the motion.
Also move.
I'll second. Second.
You're in charge.
Oh, that's right, yeah. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries.
Now let's talk about the budget. We're a little bit behind the 8 ball this year, just where we're at right now, but this is a unique situation because this is a 190 entity. And actually your budgets, each of your budgets, actually provides for the money that provides the funding for this organization. So you go through your budget process, you're adopting those amounts in your formal budgets to county in each of the cities that does that. Well, what we've been able to, what our auditors told us we can do with the consortium, since it's a 190 entity, but not a council of governments, is we can do an informal budget. We can adopt an informal budget. But technically, and this is where I'm a little bit concerned this year, technically, we need to stay, the budget has historically stayed under $150,000 a year. You can use this process of simply presenting it to the governing body adopts the budget. When you exceed $150,000, it potentially puts you in a different process that you have to do. Right now, as we got into this, the proposed budget is less than $150,000 draft you've got in front of you. We may need to amend that based on, as Paul takes you through the process of getting a bid. We're gonna have to look at where that puts us in the budget, and then come back, the staff will have to come back to you with recommendations of what we do to amend the budget if that's necessary. But it is allowed, it's a different process than you're used to when you go through your very detailed process, for your municipalities, but that's the proposal.
Into budget now.
Right now, there is not an approved budget, that's why it's a fund.
Oh,
We need to have something adopted.
And also, we're going
Paul will, I actually, based on history, I worked with Paul and I prepared
okay.
based on our history of doing this, but what this does not include, and I want to be real clear about that, is it does not include, $150,000 alone just to tear down the building, if that's the case. So we'll have to deal with that issue from a budget standpoint if that comes up.
so Wayne, are you recommending that we approve the budget now and then look at doing a budget amendment in the future?
Before you award a contract, before you do anything related to that, and see where, because if it comes down on the lower end of this, you might be able to fit it within the $150,000 budget. If it's $45,000 or $40,000, you could probably fit it. 150 won't.
So we should, discuss approving the budget now, and
Yep.
as we get towards taking the building down and making that decision. If the bid is super high, we would need to come back and amend our budget.
Yeah, so I'd actually recommend adopting this budget, proposed budget, and then you can amend it before you move forward with the expenditures on that particular activity.
I can make a motion to adopt the budget as presented.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
Sure.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Now, you've heard everything on the demolition of the building, and I think maybe we've already there's some direction for going. But right now, it's a more formal bid process, right, Paul?
We're gonna have to go to a formal bid process.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
So the demolition to just tear the building down, but then you still have to haul it away somewhere, or what?
So-
do with
So we fortunately are located right at Thompson Disposal
Right.
location, so.
Do you think they give us a bar from this?
Well, what I did, it is a fairly straightforward thing in contracting to say, recycling is part of this, and there's a recouped dollar amount to the recycling. It doesn't mean that it pays for all the drop boxes that you, but we can possibly offset some of those disposal costs with some of the recycling value. Depending on where metal is on the day, you could do well, you may not do well. And so I don't want to have that oversold. There'll be a cost to disposal and hauling as well. So there's going to be that component, not in the 150 if it really turned out. It's a good observation.
So I think, and there's no real decision that needs to be made today on that, but more information will be forthcoming.
Is there a deadline on the removal of it?
There was, but I think Paul's getting an extension of that.
I'm going to be clear to the city that we need time or to organize our ducks. And so we're gonna, like I say, we're working in cooperation with Thompson at that site to make sure that we don't occupy the building past a certain date. And if the city will accept that, but I think it buys us time. We don't want to be taking it down in high weather, but otherwise. Otherwise, if we get some time, then it allows us the ability to mobilize resources, hopefully economic.
So the city council of Newport will have to vote on that.
Well, you're building official.
I think the building official has
Okay.
discretion.
Yes, I think that's.
They don't have to go to the council. Okay.
All right, then I think the last thing for formal is to set the next meeting date, time. So calendars, and I don't know where you're going.
Well, we said a Thursday out, and then Nancy and I'll send it.
Okay. So you wanna just do, see if we're available. for
4 weeks from now.
One day, September.
Today, so for me,
What time are we? One?
You can do it at 1 now, because I think technically,
Yeah, right.
we're going to spend time to figure out. how to-
Yeah, that sounds good.
1 o'clock. Nancy, are you gonna send the invite around?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, let's put it in here so it doesn't go away.
And Paul will have an agenda put together.
Yes, I'll have an agenda for you
and,
through Nancy. Sure.
yeah. And, RFP, ASAP.
That's my next discussion when I leave here, after I needed to chat with you folks about what the thoughts were. I don't think opposing CIS was ever in our cards, but I wanted to make sure we, as a group, understood what we were looking at. My thought is a decision probably will not be made by us until after 30 days. So we're going to do a longer extension than my original plan to the building official. So I originally sent the letter saying, oh, and I think there's going to be a long extension. Just to get the complex.
I imagine a building inspector will want to discuss that with Spencer Neville.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So, yeah, and so he has an email from me currently. He's welcome to respond to that one, or he can wait for a new one from me when I finally get more idea as to what we're going to do.
Public comment?
Okay, so we're now moving into the public comment. I'm just gonna put my timer ready here. We have 3 minutes for in-person public comment. I think there was a written public comment we got this morning that I think Ken got to all of you as well. And I can get you a copy of that. If you didn't get it.
I haven't been available this morning.
Oh, okay.
That's
Before you
okay.
leave, I'll get you a copy of the written statement. So
Thank you.
did you want to make public comment, Cindy?
Well, one of the things I had a question for is where is,
Can you introduce yourself?
oh, my name is Cynthia George, I'm a Lincoln County resident. Poorly represented, obviously, and I'm wondering who is is there a public representative on this board? Overseeing all this garbage in the county and what's happening to our water, or is it just businesses and elected officials? Why is there not a public representative sitting on this board?
It's an interagency agreement between the municipalities and the county, and
Ah.
they select representatives.
So we just can come and voice our opinions.
Mhm.
So all these meetings are open?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. And is it possible to know who the representatives are that are here also?
Because there's public members, they're not part of it.
There'll be minutes posted, and that will list the people who,
And when you're retiring now, so you'll no longer,
I will not be involved.
thank you.
Wonderful, that's it.
Anyone else want to make public comment? No, okay. All right, anything else we need to do?
Got the meeting set, you're ready to go.
Okay, meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Stop. Now, I don't know what you do to, I guess you can just end it.
Mhm.
And it
Webinar
stays.
for all.
Okay.